All right. Good evening, my friends. It's wonderful to have all of you here. And again, this is even without Sandy's bagels, cream cheese, and lox, and you still came anyway. So we give you extra credits. So there we go. Hopefully, people either had dinner or will have dinner. We'll have to. I guess if anyone ever wants to take the lead on it, you can do that. I'm not opposed. So we were talking about between Mincha and Ma'ariv. We had an interesting halacha that came up in the daily mitzvah that we were talking about not making images that could be potentially for idol worship. So I was just talking with a number of the people who were there. They're asking about what about eagles and those kind of things, and what about flags. So I said this is going to be an upcoming shiur on the halacha l'maaseh. We're keeping them up there. Don't worry. I have to like always before I get to one of these juicy topics. I always have to preface saying we're doing this as it says in the Gemara, lidroshu lekavel schar, to study it and to receive reward upon studying it. So, but it's Ramosha Feinstein has a tshuva on flags in the synagogue, and rest assured, I'm trying to line up all of my classes to fit with the time of year. So I guess when we get around to Flag Day in a little less than a year from now, put that on the docket. Okay, so chapter 3 of the book. You see, this is the issue. You're all cheating. You're reading it already. Well, don't worry, I'll have fresh material by then. It's not just going to be a repeat of what we did.
That you sent out too when you got here, wasn't it?
Oh yes, I referenced it in there. As you can see, I recycle a few things here and there. Tricks of the trade. All right, see, I have to hide all my articles from all you guys. That way I can teach the shiur. Okay, these should be my problems if people actually want to read it. Anyway, so previously on Igros Moshe, which is how all of the TV shows usually do a recap, right? And then I referenced that I always remember Yu-Gi-Oh growing up, and no one knew what I was talking about. So insert whatever you do. All right, so there you get points for that. Your kids watch it. All right. So here's the quick recap. And for those who, again, you can either listen or if you want to follow along on page 4. This is one of the few times you'll see I made a little table on here because my head was starting to spin, and so I had to put some material on here to keep myself clear. There's essentially, you remember anyone remember Punnett squares from biology class? Right, so Darwin's already been around for a while. So the Punnett squares, this is what it reminds me of. So we have 4 different permutations over here. There's 2 questions we have to ask essentially. There's singing like a cappella, and there is with instrumental accompaniment. And instrumental accompaniment is going to be a little bit more celebratory, if you will, than just singing business in the Jewish music industry. There's like a group, I think it was called A.K. Pella, and their whole thing was they'd sell all their CDs out during the 3 weeks, and some guy was beatboxing on it, but it sounded like the instrument. You couldn't tell the difference between them. It was like someone just showed me this. Someone who I follow on WhatsApp. There's this yeshivish thing that I hope I don't get in trouble for this. This yeshivish flyer that was going around, which was basically like in the Lakewood areas, telling women not to wear shaitels during the 3 weeks. That way, to be more tznius. So what they meant was don't wear shaitels, like wear some like huge covering thing, but it only just said don't wear the shaitels. So it was I think people may have misread the other way. Anyway, so when it comes to this, so that's one question. One question is the instrument versus non-instrumental, and then there's the context of where it is taking place as well. Is it taking place here in our Sons of Israel boardroom, which I think is a great place to hang out personally, but no one would say we're necessarily partying it up right now, to use the vernacular. But if it was happening, let's say at the tap room down in Tillman over there, where we had that Maimonides Society thing that I got to go into over there, which was a lot of fun. Perks of being a rabbi. You see, even I felt so self-conscious. I went to the Maimonides Society event in the tap room, and here I am, surrounded by all these doctors and MDs and whatnot, and I feel like I have the lowest IQ in the room. So anyway, so that's the other question. So there's 3 permutations. Rashi and Tosos seem to be of the opinion that it's all about bar. If you are at a Beis HaMishtos, as we call it, in a celebratory, alcohol is flowing, then it will be usher. but it doesn't matter. And then if you're not in a bar, you could play instruments, you could have a concert, you could, whatever. Again, I've been trying to cajole Jordan to do a classic rock concert for a while. We're going to bring in Fleetwood Mac, the Stones, and Shal Shudis, by the way, this past Shabbos. I know, Alan, that was your favorite part when we sang the Iron Man again, Lezecher Nishmas Ravazi, Zichron Levracha. Does anyone know the Iron Man? Oh, no, okay. Alan only he only indulged me once. I'm not going to do it again.
Next week, Sinatra.
And you're leading it. All right. So, but then for Rambam, it depends. If it's instrumental is permissible when it's outside of the alcoholic context. But if there's alcohol flowing, even a cappella is problematic. And then the third opinion was Rambam contradicts himself between his Mishnah Torah and his Teshuvos, his responsa. In his responsa, he basically says, everything is asur, everything is forbidden, unless it is strictly within a religious context, unless it's just a chazan up there davening, otherwise everything is forbidden. And speaking about suffering and all that, we should get the AC going on over here. Let me just let me find that. I don't know about you. We should all enjoy yourselves. And trust this is somebody who wants to control the temperature. I can't manage everything while giving a shirt. All right. There's a principle in halacha called kol da'olam gavar. When something's in the middle, the strongest person gets to seize it and gets control. So there it is. It's like when you throw the bread. Okay, never mind. Anyway, so Ramosha Feinstein in Igros Moshe, this is Osya Dalit over here. He says that really we should paskin like the Bach. The Bach being one of the commentaries on the Torah, and he says we should paskin like the Rambam and his Chuvos. In other words, Ramosha says really we shouldn't be listening to music for enjoyment nowadays. He says af shirayasa klum mikol makom roy lahachmir. It's better not to listen to any music now. This is easy for Moshe Feinstein to say, if you'll excuse me, because he's a Gadol B'Yisrael, and when he's basically learning Torah all day, and he doesn't have time to listen to music. He probably couldn't care less about listening to music, if we're being honest. But he says, but you know what? I think there's some room over here. We shouldn't listen to any instruments nowadays. And here's the interesting thing. What we rely on a lot nowadays is Rashi and Tosfos in this sugya, who say that as long as there isn't alcohol flowing, everything is essentially fair game. But Ramosha Feinstein says, actually, if you read Rashi and Tosfos closely, it sounds like they're not actually arguing with the Rambam. Even they would concede we shouldn't be able to play any instruments nowadays, even if there's no alcohol around. And he says the sole exception to this rule is for a dvar mitzvah. A dvar mitzvah is a mitzvah matter. Now, he's a little bit expansive in this. He says this doesn't mean davening only. Davening is just one example of a mitzvah. But let's say a wedding for a chassan and a kala, bride and groom. That's also an example of a mitzvah gathering. It's like in the yeshivish world, the weddings are such like a big networking event and everything. I remember when I was in high school in a Mesivta, a black hat school. So they never, all my friends in the mono-Orthodox schools, they go on all these field trips. And every single year there's a trip that they go. We didn't go on any trips when I was in high school. Maybe I don't know how much it was a religious thing versus a budgetary thing, but I just remember in 9th grade we were all excited because this is terrible. The Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the school, his father-in-law, I think it was, passed away. So he said, all right, guys, we're getting buses. We're going into Borough Park and we're going to the funeral. And we're like, wait, we're actually going on a trip somewhere? So we hop on the buses and then we get to this funeral and all of Ocean Parkway, I think it was at the Mirror or something, all of Ocean Parkway, it's flooded, everything's blocked off. And then when my friends, we're sitting here listening to all these eulogies in Yiddish, we have no idea what's flying. Then this is back when we couldn't entertain ourselves on our, even I, such a youngster, our phones back then were still just, you have to still do the texting with the numbers. We had to press something 3 times again. And then the flip phones with the full keys go on YouTube back then. And you're like, we didn't have phones back. Okay, I understand that. Yes, but even we had trouble. So then my friend says, oh, there's a pizza shop around the corner. We should go to the pizza shop. And we had such a great time. Like, wow, that was like the best trip ever in high school, going to the funeral because they didn't take us out on anything else. So this is the kind of world that we're talking about over here. They go to the weddings, and also Makami Mitzvahs Tzedakah, music as well. Now here is the part that everybody has been waiting for. Question of recorded music. Is recorded music fundamentally different than live music? And if I were to take a yay or an nay over here, do we think that there is a fundamental difference between recorded versus live music? Give me a thumbs up if you think there's a difference. And if you think there's no difference, because I see a lot of thumbs right now. Ah, Lee, I appreciate that. You just want to be contrarian, or you have a reason for it? Please.
Music is music.
Music is music, right? I guess you're saying it's the
reason.
what?
They're saying for the same purpose.
You can have a DJ at a function. You have to have live music.
Interesting. Well, that's an interesting point. Would you call a DJ non-live music, or maybe because there's a guy there who's busy jockeying the discs, as it were. So maybe that is called live music, and that's what's a little bit unclear over here. So I'll tell you what he writes briefly in this section. He says, "Ayidei ha-radio im nishma zimra de puma mutter v'michlei zemer aser." Now, he's not talking about even sphere to 3 weeks. He's talking about in general right now. He says, in general, if it is a cappella music, you can listen to it. If it is instrumental music through the radio, you can't listen to it. And then he says, ubi me sphira, and certainly during sphira, and certainly during the 3 weeks as well, yesh lasur bezimra de mana afla matir, to use. And now mana over here usually means, a mana means like a kli, it means like an item, it means like a vessel. So it's a little unclear to me what he means over here. I think he means even the instrumental music through the radio, which if you're lenient on that throughout the year, he's saying is during Sphira and during the 3 weeks, certainly one should not listen to it. And this is essentially the basis of the psak in much of certainly the yeshiva world, that they will not listen to recorded music that has instruments, but they will listen to a cappella during this time. So that's what he said. Now, there's one little thing that I found afterwards. See, the issue is, if you look over here on the front, this was sheer number tests. Right now, I'm up to like 32 right now in my archives. I'm going out of order because I figure now I have the luxury of lining this up based on the times of year. So this is still earlier on. So what happened was there was a sefer that came out only last year, while I was kind of in middle, after I researched this, called Sefer Zikinecha Yomru Lach. It's by Rabbi Chaim Mintz, who is mashkiach at Yeshiva of Staten Island, which is Rabbi Reuven Feinstein's yeshiva, Rabbi Reuven Feinstein being the son of Rav Moshe Feinstein. So he wrote a whole book. It's part of a genre of books in which people will write their reflections of different Torah scholars that they interacted with. And Rav Moshe Feinstein is kind of the main event in the book. So I already made the source sheet, and usually like what I have to do is I have to play around to keep everything looking very nice and tight. So I just slipped it in as a footnote, an endnote all the way at the end. I'll read it for you. It's in the italics, really the last words on the document. He says, "V'shamati me Rav Avram Biederman Shlita." I heard from Rav Biederman, who spoke to Moshe Feinstein. Shesholas Maran ima isru gam in shmiya behaklata. He asked him if this prohibition applies to recorded music. And Veheshim Maran Shoskamis, or Moshe Feinstein clarified what. Remember, this was like a 2-liner in the tshuva. He didn't elaborate on this. It was very ambiguous what he meant. He says, after clarifying this with Rav Moshe Feinstein, he says to him, "V'kavanaso." Shmiya b'radio b'shah sheminagin mechai, and he gives you the translation right over there. Live concert. If one listens to a live concert via the radio, that's what he means is aser. Machmas kol ha'esek, because the concert is coming live to you. This is, by the way, intellectually consistent with when we'll get to the Shir Purim time on Megillah reading. Ramosha Feinstein was of the opinion, he didn't say you should do this ideally, but he said it could be done, that Megillah through a microphone is considered hearing that person's voice because it is still a live reading of it. He wouldn't go so far as to say that if I listen to a recording of it post facto, it would be okay. I don't think he would go that far. But if you're in the same room and he's using a microphone, that's considered an extension of the voice. So I,
Same rule.
well, I think same venue, I guess. I don't know if room. I don't want to get caught up on the room.
Through a PA system.
How would they get to the same?
Radio.
Yeah.
Like
That's what I would
like
think.
if you're in your house.
Right.
doing the service
Oh,
on
I
radio,
see.
That's not good. Anyway.
So this is this Ramosh is a little bit ambiguous as to how far he would go. He has a tshuva. I mean, this is well, we'll get to this shir, but he has a tshuva about, let's say there's someone who's in a hospital and they're not going to hear, I think it was Havdalah maybe, and so you could recite Havdalah through the phone, but again over there the person's not going to hear Havdalah otherwise, so that's not such a strong case. But yeah, these are the kind of questions we'll get to. The question is, how is a microphone considered an extension of my voice? I mean, it's just a replication. So when we get to that topic, we'll elaborate more. But what I wanted to get to is going back to page number 5. Just to wrap up this section over here, one of the main dispensations he gave is, let's say someone is a tutor and they give guitar lessons, let's say. So does that mean they can't make a living? They can't give guitar lessons during Sphira and during the 3 weeks? I mean, think about all those missed weeks of income that they could potentially make. So Ramosha says, this is source Tezayin, Dilidide Ein Ze Inyan Simcha in the bold, that this is not called Simcha for him. It's for parnasa. It's for a livelihood. I mean, most people who have to teach a kid how to play guitar from scratch. Do we have? Are you a tutor, or does anyone give lessons here? No. Oh, but I think most people who have to teach a kid how to do from scratch, it's probably not the most. I mean, maybe it's gratifying at the end of the day once they learn how to do it, but it's not the most fun experience. There's a reason you get compensated for your time for doing it. So that's one important dispensation he gives. Yeah. 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 So I think in English, we even use the word chanting. We even use a different word in the English word. I don't think trup is considered singing per se, though it's interesting you bring it up because this is the question, if and when we get to this topic about Kol Isha and women singing. So the question is there a distinction between a live performance of a song versus chanting of trup? There's other halachic questions to be asked, but that's an interesting question. I think there are some Haredi poskim that went so far as to claim that Kol Isha applied to public speaking as well. Clearly, we don't poskim like that over here. But just as like an interesting, as my Rebbe Rasablovsky would call a collector's item, it's an interesting thing just to be aware that's out there in the ether. Okay. This is worthy of a whole introduction, but take a look. If you're looking at Os Yud Ches, there is a sefer there called the Ma'aneh Igros. Has anyone heard of the Ma'aneh Igros? Probably not, because you have to go on a website called bandsfarm.com to get it. I kid you not. It's called bandsfarm.com. I'm not the type of guy who just looks through Bandsfarm for fun. I mean, maybe like when I was like a teenager, I was like a little bit more into that, and the thrill but on this Bandsfarm, Ma'aneh Igros is basically this guy Feinstein. So he wrote a whole, through him. I mean, Chacham Avadi not over here, but in other places does. Many poskim disagreed with him on many issues, but none of them wrote an entire book dedicated to repudiating the Igros Moshe. So this guy who had nothing better to do and wanted to make a name for himself, I guess, he decided, he's like, who is this person to write all these huge kulas? I'm going to dedicate a book to take down Rav Moshe Feinstein. And the joke's on him because except for us over here who are doing some Rav Moshe shiurim in depth, most people never pick up the sefer if they're not interested in the history behind it. Part of the reason it's banned, actually, I'd say the main reason it's banned, is not because he disagreed with him intellectually. He actually has a number of good svaras. He has good logic many times. He brings up salient points that we should consider. But if you look at what he writes here, he says, "V'hachotziv lachlok alabach." He said he calls Ramosha a chutzev, having chutzpah to disagree with the Bach. He uses all sorts of disparaging language, and in fact, this eventually at some point, maybe we'll do this as the capstone shiur, or maybe at one point I'll go back and give a proper introduction to Igros Moshe, which I should have done. If one looks just simply at the front matter of the book, it essentially says in the Hebrew that there's this guy named Moshe Feinstein who is busy being machshel, tripping up all of the Jewish people on serious violations of the Torah, serious transgressions. And here I'm going to set the record straight by writing this book. So you can see kind of what his agenda was. He makes it very clear. The first part of the book is that he just keeps going at Moshe Feinstein, and it becomes very ad hominem, but every now and then he has some good material. So I try to include it where it's useful. Yes, Marsha.
How does one go about banning a book?
Are you interested in the practicum? It's like they're learning Avodah Zarah in Takyomi now. They ask me, how do you do Avodah Zarah? But how does one ban a book? Usually there's a group of rabbis, maybe from the Agudas Yisrael or from some group. They put out some cherem, saying they all sign on something, say thou shalt not read this book. And then it gets out there and people are like, oh, I wasn't going to read this book otherwise, but now that it's banned, I guess I'm curious to read it. So it's the greatest marketing strategy. I think that's what happened with Rabbi Natan Slifkin. He wrote some book and he had something about science and whatever in there. It probably wasn't super controversial, to be honest. But then he had the fortune or misfortune, depending you ask, of it being put in cherem. And that, I guess, he's a scholar worthy of note in his own right, but I think that helped boost his profile. So some people look to get put in cherem. I still remember when I was in 10th grade, I was starting to read Rosh Soloveitchik, and I'm not claiming I understood everything I was reading at the time. Lots of words like ontological and Weltanschauung and annotated, elucidated, and all that kind of stuff. So I was writing my notes, something about the philosophy of modern orthodoxy, and my Rebbe, finds it somewhere. He takes one look at it in front of the whole class. He says, "This is kfira. This is heresy." So I was like, I knew I made it. I finally had something put in cherem from the young age of 10th grade. As a teenager, I already had put something put in cherem. Now I'm trying hard to not be put in cherem. So for the Moshe Feinstein on Pirkei Avos book, which the typesetting just finished, thank God, today for the main part of it, I got a haskama from Ruvain Feinstein. So hopefully they won't put me in cherem now. I have the protexia now. Baruch Hashem. All right, on to our next question, my friends. The question of listening to non-Jewish music, right? Let's just assume we can listen to music all year round. I mean, I admit my sins before you today. We have the radio tuned by default to 99.9 The Hawk in the car, so that's usually what's on. Because if I'm coming to shul, by the time I could have plugged in my phone and turned to a podcast or something to listen on, I could have been at shul already. So it's just like whatever. I just let the radio play for 2 minutes. So what about listening to Christian music? So this is at the end of page 5. He asks about listening to Nigunim Shemizamrim Hanotzrim that the Christians sing. Can I listen to Christian music? Can I listen to Christian music on the radio, right? If the radio is a mitigating factor, maybe if I listen to it on the radio, it's not as bad. So he writes, interestingly, what about, and those learning Daf Yomi will especially appreciate it because you're learning Avodah Zarah right now. What if that certain worship is no longer being done, right? Let's say, I don't know, one finds some sort of Viking Nordic hymn and they really like it and they want to sing it, and except for some, I'm sure there's still some people who like to worship Thor and who else is in the give me some other people in the Baal? Oh, that's a different pantheon. Odin, thank you. Oh yeah, Loki and all from we know from Marvel now. So right, the Nordic pantheon, they find a song, so most people are not worshiping Thor these days. So would that be mutter? And he says that it should be usher in any event, even if it's no longer being worshipped. And he says, remember how we saw before that teaching music should be okay nowadays even during Sphira. If I'm making parnasa, if I'm making a living, he writes notably, Ba'af leparnasa aser. Even for livelihood purposes, this would be forbidden, which means he really thinks it's forbidden because he doesn't give a dispensation for livelihood the same way he did during Sfira for what we might call more pariv music. Now, where does Ramosha get his reasoning from, right? Find me a source in the Gemara. Where does it say I can't listen to Christian music? Now, here's the interesting thing. When I was growing up, and all of my rebbeim were telling me you can't listen. They didn't say Christian music. They said you can't listen to Goyish music, meaning all non-Jewish music was basically classified in the same category. But there's a lot of room again to distinguish between Christian music versus secular music, most of the kinds of pop music versus classical music. What is even considered, what even makes something Jewish, right? Like, was I eating a bagel when I was writing it? If my grandmother's dog was Jewish, does that make this Jew? And if I'm a Jew, right? Let's say I can't compose music for the life of me, but if I compose a song, does it all of a sudden become Jewish music because I'm Moshe Kurtz and Jewish? Or is it the contents of the song that makes it Jewish, right? This is an interesting question. When we talk about Jewish culture in general, when we have Jewish cultural events, what makes something Jewish culture? We'll get to it in a shir. I mean, the short answer is I think it comes some sort of connection to the Torah. It's probably what makes it Jewish. But we're going to get to a shir on non-Jewish names, and that's where that discussion takes place. Mayor, yeah.
Christian music. Is that music that has words, or were they classical?
I am so glad you asked that. I'm so glad you asked that because Ramosha Feinstein himself addresses your question about is there a difference about whether there's words or not. So I'll skip a few sources just to get to the answer. Look at Chafei, literally the end of page number 6. He writes, Ach lishmoa hanigan hazeh. So listen to just the nigan, just the tune. From these people who are not intending for avodah zara, elazamar ba'ama, they're just singing in general. Even though it's not forbidden, and who below hamilim shemeshachlev lehem, if they're not actually using the words that praise their deity, I mean, basically, hevel means, of course, emptiness. If it doesn't have religious content, it's not forbidden. It's repugnant, he says, meaning it's not forbidden, though. He just thinks it's not a good thing to do it. So, excellent point. This is exactly what I get to your point, Mayor, which is this is the connection over here. Ramosha Feinstein is consistent on nigunim. Remember in the first year how he said what was the mitigating consideration of why, even if the singer composed the music after he became a Rasha, after he became wicked, and let's say he was a heretic, terrible, terrible, terrible. If he wrote a Torah, we would burn it. But nonetheless, we could use his music. Why? Because the words are okay. The words he even got from Tanakh probably, or from our sages. He composed the tune, but a tune does not have inherent sanctity. And the flip side of the coin is that it doesn't have any inherent lack of, I'll give you the antonym for sanctity, my friends. Any tuma, any impurity. It doesn't have any inherent impurity in it. Tunes are neutral by nature. They're as neutral as this paper over here I have. There's nothing special about this paper. Now I put words on it. Okay, so the words, the content that's put on here has kedusha, but the paper itself, there was nothing inherently special about the paper. So if I have a plain piece of paper, that's what it is. So it's the same logic. When he gets to the Christian music, he does not classify nigunim as being able to be, let's say, makabel tuma, to be able to contract impurity, we might say. Yes, Mike.
I can't believe I'm saying this out loud.
Oh boy.
But
I'm bracing myself.
so in other words, it's okay to sing Adon Olam to Silent Night.
Yeah.
Well, with a caveat, I might add. There's another reason why, according to just this reason is fine, but the issue is if when we're singing Adon Olam, people are not thinking about Adon Olam, they're now thinking about Silent Night. So then that's the issue from a distractive standpoint. Though it is a very catchy tune, I do admit. Right? Maybe at the next Shalosh Shodas, Alan, we're going to sing the Niggin of Silent Nights, right, Michael? Right? You'll lead it. Well, you don't have Shalosh Shodas at Shabbos, so let's take a rain check. There is Shalosh Shodas. We're just not having it at the shul. This I was thinking along with Alei Tzion, right? Back to back. Right. And
Maybe it's not normally used.
Yeah. Yeah. Right, as long as you don't have that association. So I'll give you, I mean, I think it's nice. I mean, Scarborough Fair. I mean, honestly, Scarborough Fair is like a very nice, right. And for Adon and I forgot who was telling me. It was Jordan who was telling me. Someone was saying like you do any tune to Adon apparently. It's like the 4-chord thing.
It's really Paul Simons that make the Jewish music though.
So that's such a, oh, right. Well, sorry, I remember you brought that up as well. Right, Simon and Garfunkel. Right, so that's the question. So if they're, but you know, they invoke Jesus more times than they invoke Hashem. So, right, it's just Hashem loves you more than you can know. Well,
You can't go to a Christian wedding if they're singing.
so here's the thing with a Christian wedding. It's not just the singing that's the question. It's that a Christian wedding, if I'm not mistaken, is an actual service. So it's there's a sacrament there. It's a sacrament. So and generally it's in a church also. So there's a question about walking into and I have to distinguish between the sanctuary of a church versus, you know, the rest of the church, like the social hall. So when there's voting that takes place, and that's in the church social hall, that is much more negotiable than going into the sanctuary of a church. There might be a distinction between Trinitarian versus non-Trinitarian. So I guess if they're more from like the more traditional in the Trinity, then it's a bigger challenge for us. But yeah, these are all worthy of their own shiurim. Every single, you know, sub question over here is a shiur unto itself, my friends. And this is how Talmud usually works, right? You ask a question and you go off on a tangent, like, how did I even get here? But that's the beauty of learning Torah together. I just want to quickly backtrack. Remember I talked about fondly my, I don't want to sound like I'm coming off wrong over here. In my high school days in Mesivta, I credit them for my love of learning Torah and any abilities that I have. A lot of it came from those days over there. So any jokes I make are not to be disparaging. I'm very grateful to them. But when they talked about not listening to Goyish music, their words, not mine. So where'd they get this from? So Moshe Feinstein points to a Gemara in the Talmud Bavli, in the Gemara. It asks, what was wrong with Acher? Remember we talked about Acher in the first class? Rabbi Meir's Rebbe, who became a heretic. So the question is, what did he do that turned him into a heretic? The Gemara asks. What? Right, you have the whole Pardes thing. So that's part of it. But according to at least, in this section of the Gemara, at least partially, part of what kind of maybe predisposed him to maybe being more susceptible when he went into Pardes was Zemar Yevani lo pasak mipume. Greek music did not depart from his mouth. He was always singing Greek music. Now, what is wrong with singing Greek music, we might ask? So Rashi says the issue is singing it after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Remember, we saw last week, all these bans on music are post-temple mourning. That's why certainly during the 3 weeks when we're mourning the temple, we at least be careful during the 3 weeks, if not the entire year. But the Maharsha comments on this and asks the following questions. I don't get it. If the issue is listening to music post-destruction of the temple, who cares that it was Greek music? Any music should be forbidden. What's wrong with Greek in particular? So he says, rather, what was the issue? Dahaya bominas bezemer gufe, because the content of the Greek music was heretical. Mishum demashkel aminas, it would pull him to heresy. And so Rav Moshe actually extrapolates from this Maharsha that is the issue that we have over here, that it predisposes us to heresy. And so that's where he gets the whole idea against Christianity. Now, here's the thing, though. Those who are pointing to Tshuva of Rav Moshe and pointing to this Maharsha, this should only ban heretical music. But what about secular music? And assuming the secular music doesn't have any, kind of like licentious content, which a good portion of it does. But what about the stuff that doesn't have that in there? Ironically, if you actually, I don't know if you're into the heavy metal genre, but heavy metal genre, in my experience, actually doesn't have a lot of that problematic content. If anyone, I remember, always being very into still into Metallica. See, I tell you that after I accept the job. So they have this song like One. The song's called One, and it's actually about someone. It's very dark. It's it's about war, and it's about someone who's kind of like in a hospital bed, and he's kind of lost all his faculties, and it's a question of kind of like asking for euthanasia. It's like a very, very dark song, but they deal with these heavier kind of themes. So there's real stuff out there that we can appreciate on a human level. But here's what's interesting methodologically. How often for those who like reading halachic literature, how often do you see a Maharsha cited in halachic literature? I'll answer you, not too. Yeah, it's good that you're giving me that look because you don't usually see it. The Maharsha over here is what we call the Chidushei Agados. Like what we do on Wednesdays, we learn Agada. Medrash Rabbah is an agadic source. It's a homiletical source. Rarely do you cite a Medrash Rabbah in a legal discussion because they're different genres. So the Maharsha over here is an agadic source. It doesn't belong in a halachic discussion. So methodologically, Ramosha Feinstein trying to tell us that listening to music with Avodah Zarah lyrics in there is forbidden because the Maharsha interpreted the Gemara so. But who's the Maharsha to be a halachic source be cited in this discussion? Now, one could read the Gemara on their own. I'm sure Moshe has his own chops. He can read on his own. But to root it in the Maharsha, that's a little bit of a categorical error, one might say. So this is, I'll give you a good example. This comes up in halacha sometimes. I don't want to go into this topic right now, but suffice to say, the question of surrogacy in halacha. So Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach once said that he could find a precedent in the Talmud for virtually anything. The question of surrogacy in halacha, like who's the parent of it, of the child, is it the biological mother or the surrogate? He could not find a clear precedent. The best precedent that poskim have been able to find probably is Targum Rabbeinu Yonasan, Pseudo Jonathan commentary on the Torah. Now, what you got to know about Pseudo Jonathan, the reason it's called Pseudo Jonathan is because actually Targum Yonasan is a translation on the Nevi'im, on the prophets. He didn't write on the Torah. So it was mistakenly attributed to Yonasan, to Jonathan. Hence, scholars call it Pseudo Jonathan. So, but even let's just say it actually was the great Yonasan himself, Rabbeinu Yonasan. Nonetheless, you don't cite Unkelis in a halachic discussion. Targum Yonasan is not a halachic source. It's a nice source for a Tanakh shir, not for a halacha shir. So Targum Yonasan there, but why did they bring it in? Because basically this is like wild Targum Yonasan that Yosef was originally was conceived by Leah, and Dinah was conceived by Rachel. And then when she davened to have another son, they basically swapped in utero. And then who does the child get attributed to? The surrogate. It's Yosef is attributed to Rachel, and Leah it gets Dinah. Now we're all like saying like that's a really interesting basis for a halachic discussion of surrogacy. And if you're scratching your head thinking that's a little bit odd, you would be right to say that. And that just shows you sometimes when there isn't a good halachic source, and sometimes poskim are looking for some basis, they will dabble in the world of agadic literature if they don't find a good halachic source. But that methodology is dubious. So that's just interesting from a methodological standpoint. Yes. Yes. Yeah. So this gets into the general discussion, which you're right to be asking, Art, which is how do we understand and classify other world religions? So Islam is easier. Now, ironically, on a social level, we have more challenges with Islam these days. But theologically, Islam is monotheistic. Christianity, things get very murky, just to suffice to say that. And then when you get to all the Eastern religions, forget about it. Now, the interesting thing about the Eastern religions, I don't understand them so well, but I think in Hinduism, there still is like a supreme deity over all the others. So maybe there have been those who've been contorting themselves to say that it's not really true polytheism since there is a supreme God over all the others. But I still remember back in Stanford, we had the Navaratna restaurant, and Razusha Blech, who was a posek of the Vad back then, he said that it's okay to go in there, even though they literally have an avodah zarah right when you go in the door. So like kind of like that medrash where they try to get them to bow down, Old Chana's children to bow down, right? Then they throw the candy down, so they'll bow down to avodah zarah. So I like straighten up my posture, which I still need to work on a little bit, but straighten up my posture that way it doesn't look like I'm bowing down when I walk in over there. Yeah, I used to think it was for design, and then like I came in one day early that was one of my responsibilities was to go in there, check the restaurant on a weekly basis, and like I saw them kind of like lighting their incense candles or whatever. I'm like, oh, that actually is avodah zarah. They're not lighting Hanukkah candles. So basically, Islam is not avodah zarah pretty much. Christianity big question mark. Meiri says no. A lot of people say yes. Tosos, probably not. And then the Eastern religions, yeah. But, I mean, does anyone know any songs from the Eastern religions or anything? When you have that question, come ask me. All right. But actually, because you bring it up, that's our next source. The next source is from the Chuvos B'nai Banim. Now, Rabbi Wiener, I remember you were showing me a book from Rabbi Eitan Henkin, Hashem Yikom Demo, that his father, Rabbi Yehuda Herzl Henkin, so has anyone ever heard of Nishmat? So, okay, Abby. So for those not familiar, Nishmat is a wonderful institution. They train Yoatzot Halacha, which are women who are trained primarily in the realm of answering Nida Shailas, but also they do a lot of great work kind of working with women in the community. We should be Zocha one day. We could hire, I think a Tower Notice, actually. It's a Yoatzet, if I'm not mistaken. So, okay, we should get her as Yoatzet in residence. We can make that happen, right? So Rabbanit Henkin, she should live and be well. I think actually for Tisha B'Av, I'm in the lineup on the same. She's much more chashuv than I am, but on the Torah in Motion, she's the header, right? She's been here. How do we get her back? We gotta. What? Really? Who don't you know? Abby, this is why I'm glad you're on Adult Ed. This is your first. Okay. Wow. Okay. My only claim to fame in the Yoetzet world is that when I was in Shalavim, they set you up with families to eat at over Shabbos. So I had Yoetzet Dr. Dina Zimmerman, who was from the first graduating class of Yoetzot. She wrote this nice blue book on kind of questions related to Nida, but she's also a medical doctor, so she hit it from all angles. Really fantastic. And here I was eating at their table all these, those 2 years when I was there, and I heard she was a Yoetzet or something. I didn't realize she was big stuff until I was, engaged and getting married. And I wanted to kind of read up on some of the material that I need to know. And then I saw her book. I'm like, oh, she's big stuff. How did I take advantage of this when I was there? Anyway, so B'nai Banim is written by Rabbi Henkin's husband, Rabbi Yehuda Herzl Henkin. I see that was very feminist of me I didn't say it the other way around. I said he's like kind of secondary to him, right? He's secondary to her. So, but he wrote the Chuvos B'nai Banim. He was the main posek for Nishmat. A lot of his chuvos center around kind of issues related to I hate to call it this, but until I find a better term, like women's issues. But when you call it issues, it makes it sound like women are an issue, but you don't want to say it that way. So women and halacha, I guess the best way I could put it. So in B'nai Banim, his chuvos, he deals with this question. He cites Rav Moshe Feinstein, but he deals with some of the issues head on. On the top of page 7, the second column, he says, "L'chein ein laleches lakanter shel musika gospel." One should not listen to gospel music. By the way, I did this a while back. I did like a Jeopardy night thing in which I took it was called transliteration trivia night, in which I took words like gospel over here and I put it on the board and I had a whole PowerPoint thing. And then you don't have to know how to translate, just to sound it out. And then there were different teams that hit the buzzer. And then once you could phone a friend for a hint. I can give you the context of what it's in or the topic. If you guys are interested, after we do remote Shurim as a good pop quiz thing, we could do a trivia night. It'll be great. These are kind of the nerdy things that rabbis like to do. And he says, what's the next one? Yitziras Hamashiach Shel Handel, Handel's Messiah, or Handel, or however you want to pronounce it. Handel, that's okay. Handling and what it means. So that also he talks about. He says, it wasn't written for for prayer purposes, but he says that apparently the king of England, the Melech Anglia, he instituted a minhag. His minhag or takana was you have to stand up at a certain point during one of the movements or something. Oh, I know. No. I don't know if I'm allowed. The question was allowed to do there or not. Okay, but here's what's interesting. He says that listening to recorded music, this is the bold in the second paragraph, one's only listening to an echo, as it were. Now, if one is consistent and holds that you cannot be Yotze Megillah reading by listening to it through a device and through a radio, and also, here's the interesting thing. If one holds, let's see if I can get this right. If one holds that you can be Yotze Megillah reading through a microphone, then a man would not be able to listen to a woman through a microphone. Some suggest that a mitigating factor for kol isha, for women singing to men, is that if it's through on the radio or recorded device or something, so then it's not her voice anymore because it's going through an electronic medium. So if one says that, then you can't also hold that you could be Yotzei Megillah reading, because the question is a voice coming out of an electronic medium your voice or not? And if you could be Yotzei with Megillah reading, which is a leniency in Megillah reading, then you don't have the leniency vis-a-vis Kol Isha, because then it's still her voice. There might be another heter, but it wouldn't be the heter of it being mitigated by going through an electronic medium. So
also.
What?
It could be basically mutar, but it's still aser because it's leading you to bad thoughts.
Right. But those are two things, right? One is an inherent isser, and one is, I guess, what you call the extrinsic. So right, meaning, so when, let's say, like I personally am of the opinion that I'm fine with the Kol Isha via the radio, so that way I can still listen to my Fleetwood Mac, Stevie Nicks, or whoever else is on. So, but I also hold that I can't be Yotzei Megillah through microphone.
What about a hearing aid?
Yeah, Rosh has a tshuva on that. So hearing aid is a great question. Rosh has a separate tshuva on that. And I believe what he says there is that when it comes to hearing aid, it's considered like a part of your body. The microphone is not an extension of my body. It's a separate device. The hearing aid is actually a part of one's body. And honestly, it's not a perfect analogy, but this is good. Like on Shabbos, it's not called carrying, because it's bottled to your body at that point. And this is even better. I mean, my clothing as well. The reason I'm allowed to walk with my glasses on when there's no Erev up is because when I'm wearing my glasses, they are an adornment to an ornament or clothing to my body. So, what?
Aesthetics.
Exactly. So all these things, and
Okay.
Kal V'chomer.
The cane, if
Right.
someone uses it all the time.
Right. So the cane is like an interesting question, because one can make that argument, but one could also understand that there still might be a distinction. A cane, which the cane doesn't actually pop into the hand, it's still a separate item, but a hearing aid actually connects. I think there's like some wiring or something in there that actually connects to one as well. So that's that. Okay. Yes, Ira.
I mean, during this whole discussion, there were two issues I had. One is that when we have a conclusion, you look at the premises that lead you to that conclusion.
Mhm.
And one of the requirements for the conclusion to be true is that all the premises are true.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as one premise breaks,
Yeah.
the whole string.
Mm-hmm.
But it seemed like here in many of the statements that we had, that there were a whole lot of opinions here. And we were drawing conclusions from opinions. Am I wrong on this? Or
You're saying-
I'm wrong, but I don't.
No, I don't think you're. If I'm understanding what you're saying is that there's a lot of opinions here, but what's our conclusion? Is that the question?
Drawing a conclusion true
Yeah.
from premises or statements that are opinions.
Right.
Which may or may not be.
So there's two kind of. So it's a good question. I'd say there's two kinds of opinions out there. There was, for a short stint when I was in rabbinical school, and I was like, oh, it's a cool thing to write op-eds. So I put an op-ed or something like the forward or whatever. But then I was like, oh, but anyone can write an op-ed. An op-ed is I learned in Yiddish school a beichsvara. Like, you're just like, yeah, you can give a gut reaction. Like, anyone, it doesn't take a Talmud Chacham to write an op-ed. So I thought to myself I would, maybe I should work on writing articles that actually work based on my expertise, which is reading Torah sources and then figuring out what they're saying. Though my friend David Rich, who was my chavrusa in Shalavim when I was learning in Eretz Yisrael, when he saw my book that I put out, he's like, Moshe, these are all just your rants, but you appended Torah sources to them to justify it. that was his humorous take on it. It's like, oh, you just don't like davening being so long, and now you've had a lot of sources about Tirchin and Tzibura. That was his take on it. Anyway, but these are, Lahavdil, think about it in the American legal system. When a judge looks at the case law and looks at the statutes and they come to a decision, it's not just simply we call it an opinion, but it's an informed opinion based on their expertise and intelligent reading of the material that they have in front of them that they are trained to interpret. So this is what halacha does. We're looking at the precedent, and so Moshe Feinstein and someone else, and Rav Aviner, who I cited over here, are both looking at that same passage in the Talmud, and they're both looking at the same medieval commentaries, and they're going to come maybe to different conclusions, but it's within a certain scope because they're working with the same material. Then the job of your Joe pulpit rabbi like myself is to then look at what these major poskim kind of said. It's not for me, and this is just interesting methodologically. I'll just explain. I don't go back to the Gemara, read the Gemara and say, this is Rav Moshe Feinstein's reading, this is Rav Aviner's reading, and here's Moshe Kurtz's reading. I'm not qualified to do that. What I am qualified to do is to kind of look at what the decisions that were made by Rav Moshe Feinstein, by the Tzitz Eliezer, by Rav Moshe Sternbach, names of like the top scholars, and then I can kind of figure out what to me will make the most sense. Sometimes that means because I think so-and-so's argument in my humble opinion, is more compelling. Sometimes it is this opinion, which is legitimate, makes sense for, our community circumstances. So there's different kind of thinking that goes in over there. But yeah, I think it's important to know that these aren't just opinions that we're putting out there. They're intelligent readings, I would say. Yeah.
Maybe
Harry.
you answered this and I missed it, and I think this might help Ira's question.
Yeah.
But can you maybe summarize, if you haven't already, why we care so much about Rav Moshe?
Okay. Oh,
And
it's a whole
why
shiur.
is that so pertinent to us sitting in this room right now?
Very good. So maybe we'll take a break from the regular stream. I really should have started this off as the Hakdama, but I'll tell you what is accepted, and then I'll give a whole shiur because my introduction to the Rav Moshe Perkeos I put together was basically I grew up in a post-Rav Moshe Feinstein era. He died in 1986. I was born some years thereafter. So if you want to start, you can start guessing there. I know the beer makes you look a little bit older. So I always grew up just knowing it was taken as fact that Rav Moshe Feinstein was what they called the posek hador, the preeminent halachic decisor, certainly in America, certainly in Ashkenazic experience. That is just, you go into any yeshiva today, you go into even like into YU or anywhere, you ask who was the posek of the previous generation, I think unflinchingly everyone would answer Rav Moshe Feinstein. The big question that always interested me is, I get this is the consensus, but why? And that was what I was always guessing. And part of what I'm hoping is experientially when we go through these shiurim, we'll appreciate his methodology more. We did that less over here, but I have 8 different arguments for why it came so. And maybe we'll take a break from the regular classes and we'll do that as a shiur to explain why. I mean, I'll tell you personally why I'm invested. I learned with Rav Moshe David Tendler Zatzal, who was Rav Moshe Feinstein's son-in-law. And so I feel I got a lot of, behind the scenes of Rav Moshe Feinstein in my experience. So to me, that was kind of what triggered the interest. But honestly, for any Jew who cares about halacha, just knowing Rav Moshe is a good idea. And so it's worthy of a whole shiur. I got a whole lot of arguments lined up, and we'll see if you find it compelling when we finish it. But just to make things simple, I mean, I'll pick one reason for now. You'll see all the psakim, all the rulings that we cover in this class, whether it be lower profile things like the music ruling, whether it be higher profile things like the Manhattan Erev controversy, like drinking any milk wherever you want to go, Chelf Stam, which is a monorthodox favorite, to virtually many things. Many psakim he made shape our lives today, and we might not know it because we didn't learn the tshuva, but we're going to do it here. But okay. Great question. I should have started with that as the intro to the series. We'll rectify that, God willing, when we meet for the next year. And I missed one really good. Can I, I'm so sorry I'm keeping you overtime. Can I indulge you for just one last quick thing? One last quick thing. And if anyone needs to go, I won't be offended. We start off with a question about, remember this guy who was problematic and he basically, the question was, can we benefit from his music? Remember that whole question we started off with? So the question is, does the music matter who it came from, or is music and who cares who the composer was? So Ramosha didn't, I think he addresses this in a slightly different way. The issue with that first tshuva was, what if there's a rumor? What if there's rumors that somebody did something problematic, but nothing was ever substantiated 100%. So do we err on the side of not listening to their artwork, assuming you can't listen to artwork from a problematic person? Or do we err on the side of, well, until things are 100% proven, you can benefit? He doesn't address in terms of artwork, but he does in terms of, again, this is not for policy purposes, but just for intellectual purposes, when it comes to a shul president. So the question was as follows. The tshuva is, the question was having a president of the shul who's not Shomer Shabbos. So again, this is for not for the purpose of getting into that, but for he writes at the end, the only issue is if it is proven that he is not observing Shabbos. If there's only a rumor she'eno shomer Shabbos, that he's not observing Shabbos, eno klum. That, and like also I think he points out as well, I mean, like sometimes we don't even, there are things in Hilchos Shabbos that many people don't know. Like if I don't like tomatoes in my salad, do people know I'm not supposed to take the bad from the good on Shabbos and take tomatoes out of my salad? Then there's a lot of things we don't know about, like myself included. But he said the important thing is he says debekol ba'alma ein yecholen liftzul shum ish l'shum davar. If there's only a rumor, one is not allowed to invalidate someone on the basis of a rumor. We have a cheskas kashrus, presumption of innocence, until something is proven otherwise. Now, the question is, what happens when there's a preponderance of evidence that it crosses a threshold? That's a little tricky, but this source over here I thought was very interesting. When it comes to a singer who is questionably problematic, it seems, he says, we err on the side of keeping their presumption of innocence until one has a really good proof otherwise. So I'd be remiss if I didn't share that point. And we'll conclude over there. Thank you for indulging me. I'll try to end at 8 o'clock next time. Thank you. All right. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you.